Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Dan Donovan. He is the publisher and editor of Ottawa Life magazine, and they've just recently come out with a new issue. And his cover story is all about the conservative leadership, and he also talks a little bit about the War Measures Act. So we're going to talk about both topics today: the conservative leadership and the War Measures Act, and the hearings that are going on in Ottawa right now. Dan, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Never better. Thanks for having me back, Brian. I always love chatting with you and being on your show. Miss you in Ottawa. You know, it was always good to see you in person when you were here.
Well, you were kind enough to invite me to a bunch of fun events, and it was great to see you. So this cover story on the conservative leadership, 6,000 words, that's a very hefty investment, both in time and space for you.
Yeah, it's I encourage people to read it. I think it's a very informative story. And it's basically, the subtitle of the story is The Existential Crisis in the Conservative Party of Canada. And after that, the question is, you know, do the Conservatives want to be right, or do they want to win? And we go from there. And we look at all of the candidates. Of course, the two front runners are Pierre Poilievre, who's actually from the Ottawa area, raised out west, but has been the MP in the Ottawa riding of Carleton for the last 19 years. And of course, Jean Charest, the former Conservative minister under the government of Brian Mulroney, the former Premier of Quebec, the former Captain Canada guy that really, in my view, really saved the country back in '97 during the referendum. Then you've got, another Patrick Brown, who's the mayor of Brampton, running. Roman Baber, who was a fellow who is sort of a one-trick pony guy, interesting guy, but all about the COVID thing. And he was an anti-masker guy and booted out of Doug Ford's caucus in Ontario. But again, a thoughtful, smart guy. Leslyn Lewis, lawyer. She ran in the last leadership for the Conservatives, placed third. Then she ran for Parliament. She got elected to Parliament. Again, a little wacky. I think she's a little wacky, kind of like, you can't control that. But I mean, she's said some pretty kind of, wacky things in this leadership race. Scott Aitchison is an interesting candidate. He was a former mayor of Huntsville. He represents the Muskokas up in Bala, or in the Bala, the Bala area, the Muskokas, and that whole sort of Muskoka thing. Very smart guy, reasonable guy, conservative guy. His drawback is he doesn't speak French, but listening to him, makes you think that there's some serious people, adults in the room kind of thing. And so it's an interesting race. The problem with the Conservatives, though, is they have to decide, do they hate themselves more than they hate the Liberals or not? That's the problem.
The infighting between Jean Charest and Pierre Poilievre and also a little bit Patrick Brown is really intense and surprisingly intense.
Well, for me, in writing this piece, I found it challenging, and I'll tell you why. Because I see my role as to try to present a narrative that's balanced and factual and some perspective, and try to, show readers what the offerings are. And you're absolutely right, Brian, when you say this thing got nasty very quickly. The stakes are very high, not only for the Conservative Party of Canada, but for Canadians, because I think my observation is that there is such dissatisfaction with the Trudeau Liberal brand that they could be in danger of a meltdown like Kathleen Wynne had. I could see them being completely demolished if the appropriate counter group is put in front of the public in the next election. The problem with the Tories is, Mr. Poilievre, who by all means, there's no doubt about it, this is a very highly intelligent, smart MP, person. I would say probably the best performer in the House of Commons in terms of question period and in terms of giving speeches. So he's got some real positive attributes in my view. The challenge that he has is he has a big edge, and I don't mean an edge in the race. I mean an edge like elbows. He's got big elbows, and sometimes they say in politics you gotta cool it a bit and get your edge down, and stop high sticking all the time. And he has a propensity to do that. And I call it, sometimes it's more like a carpet bombing approach to issues and to candidates. And I think what's going to be decided in this race is that what people want? Or do they want more of what Mr. Charest is offering, which is a more moderate approach, I would say a more traditional conservative approach, a softer approach, an approach more in the middle. And the reason for that is because I think that's where many people think most Canadians are. I've always said myself that Canadians live in the middle. They tend to be more fiscally conservative, and on social issues, they tend to be a little more, I would say, progressive. Now, the problem is in this race, right from the get-go, Mr. Poilievre went on the attack to Mr. Charest and basically accused both him and Patrick Brown, who, by the way, Patrick Brown used to be an MP in the Stephen Harper government as well. And then he was the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario, as you'll recall, before he was forced out of office with these accusations made by CTV that they were then forced to retract. These what he would say are false allegations that forced him to leave. And then, of course, we know Doug Ford took over, and we know how that story ended. So, but Mr. Poilievre, right at the get-go, attacked, seriously and aggressively attacked Mr. Charest and Mr. Brown, and suggested that they weren't real conservatives. In fact, suggested that Mr. Charest was a liberal. Oh my God. So that was a problem. And of course, Mr. Charest is not a liberal. He was a liberal premier of Quebec. But as you know, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners will know, there is no conservative party in Quebec at the provincial level.
Wasn't. So there is now, but there wasn't.
Correct. Yeah, the CAC now. But prior to Legault getting in with this new party, which is essentially, a conservative party philosophically. But up until that point, and back when Mr. Charest was a premier in Quebec, there were separatists and there were federalists provincially. And if you were a federalist or you believed in Canada, you ran for the Liberals. Mr. Charest won for the Liberals. He was a premier for almost a decade. He has an excellent record as premier, both on his fiscal policy side and in terms of other achievements he made. And he left office with the government with an $8 billion surplus. So this idea that, so Mr. Charest went at him right away and said, oh yes, and he had a carbon tax in Quebec. The challenge for Mr. Poilievre is that Charest's carbon tax in Quebec actually worked. So Charest's not backing down from saying he'll have a carbon tax federally if he's elected, but it won't be the Trudeau sort of joke of a tax where all the revenues, where we're taxing everybody and all the revenues are going into the general revenue pot and not to climate change. And this is just money being spent on everything.
It's an issue that a lot of people don't understand. So I think that, Poilievre's allegation actually resonated with some people, particularly people that don't understand Quebec politics. And so I think you're quite correct to mention and reiterate, and we have to on several occasions, that there was not a conservative party, and the Liberal Party in Quebec really was an amalgamation of liberals and conservatives. And I got to tell you my own experience with that. I was president of a liberal riding association provincially in West Vancouver. And that was a conservative, a progressive conservative, but that was a conservative party. For the same reason, there was not a progressive conservative or conservative party in British Columbia. And so I have lived how the Liberal Party in British Columbia could and was a amalgam of conservatives and liberals. The social credit, which was in existence, was a little bit of the Conservative Party, if not, frankly, more like the Reform Party. But I think that a lot of people in Canada and a lot of people that aren't political insiders don't realize that Jean Charest, while being premier of the Quebec Liberal Party, leader of the Quebec Liberal Party, really was premier of a party that was an amalgam of both the Conservative and Liberal parties in Quebec. Anyway, we're going to take a break for some messages and be back in 2 minutes with Dan Donovan, the publisher and editor of Ottawa Life magazine, talking a little bit about his cover story this week on the Conservative leadership. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Dan Donovan, who is the publisher and editor of Ottawa Life magazine. His cover story this week is on the Conservative leadership campaign. It's really quite a great cover. I'm looking forward to getting my actual print copy, Dan, because it's an illustration of all the candidates sitting around a table, and it looks like quite the milieu that is going on. So we were just talking about the criticism that Pierre Poilievre labeled on Jean Charest, that he was not a true Conservative, given that he was a Liberal premier in Quebec, and that wasn't true because he was really a progressive Conservative and Liberal premier of Quebec, since there wasn't a Conservative party. But then Jean Charest countered and said that Pierre Poilievre wasn't qualified, I think was the word, to be leader of a government that had to institute law and order if he wouldn't stand up for law and order himself, and that clearly he didn't when he was the supporter of the truck convoy. What did you think of that? Was a pretty impassioned, volley back that Jean Charest made.
Well, I think it shows the gloves came off early. That happened in the very first debate in early May. And just as a precursor to that, I think your analogy about British Columbia is bang on. It's a perfect analogy. And in fact, it's an analogy Jean Charest himself has used when explaining to people with a short memory or other people that may not understand this, that like in British Columbia, there wasn't a party there for the Progressive Conservatives, so people were running the Liberal banner. The same in Quebec. And then he took great homage to some of Poilievre's remarks and pointed out to Pierre Poilievre right away and said, listen, enough with that. I'm a Conservative. I don't need you telling me what a Conservative is. I'm sort of paraphrasing this. And he said, the problem here is you're a legislator. And as a legislator, as a parliamentarian, you make laws, and that's your job. So you can't make laws and break laws at the same time. You got to make a choice. And he was making the point to Poilievre that that's what leadership is about. And what he was referring to, of course, was the fact that during the lockdown in Ottawa, the truckers' protest in Ottawa, that Pierre Poilievre, who's from an Ottawa riding, and not, I guarantee you, 90% of the city here were against this lockdown, but Mr. Poilievre met with the truckers, and he supported them. Now, there are two important things about that. The first thing is, many people admired Mr. Poilievre for meeting with the truckers. And, I would say as a person writing this story, when I was reflecting on it, and you recall, Brian, right in the middle of that lockdown, you and I did an interview on it, and just how, I think at the time we were talking about just what we were going through here in the city. So having had some hindsight now and stepping back from it and writing about it, I'm of two minds. I admire the fact that Mr. Poilievre met with these people. Okay. And I think people that slam him for meeting with them, personally, I think they're wrong, because it is the job of elected officials, including MPs, to meet with people who have a grudge or protesting. As we all know, one of the reasons this whole trucker thing went off the rails very quickly and turned the way it did was because our prime minister, instead of meeting with them and just talking to them, just in one interview, just said they were all racist, misogynist, and white nationalists. This coming from the guy, by the way, who's danced around in blackface 3 times, who fired the 2 smartest women in his cabinet, one of them an Indigenous woman, because she wouldn't go along when he was involved in corruption, which he's been sanctioned for by the ethics commissioner. So the point is, on a political level, like, Trudeau just made things so much worse. Now, Poilievre met with the truckers, and he had some empathy, or as they say en français, sympa, with those truckers, and that's fine. But, you know, there's a fine line between sort of meeting with someone and then coming out and supporting them when they're breaking the law. And the problem Mr. Poilievre has is, prior to COVID, and a lot of people forget about this, but you recall when the Wet'suwet'en out west, the Indigenous group out west of Wet'suwet'en had a blockade going because the BC government and the federal government were illegally trying to do development on their land when they had a Supreme Court ruling in their favor, and the RCMP were in there, so the Wet'suwet'en were pushing back. And then Indigenous groups across the country were blocking the rail tracks. I don't know if you remember this. It was like in early 2020, right before the COVID thing.
No, I did a show on that. I did a show on that issue with an expert on Indigenous issues.
Well, and so you'll know then. Here's the problem Mr. Poilievre has. During that the very weeks that happened, Mr. Poilievre did some interviews where he was calling for the police to be brought in to move these Indigenous people off the tracks, and to, the law is the law, and they can't be breaking the law, and they need to obey the law. So that's a bit like the pot calling the kettle black, when just like a short time later in Ottawa, the truckers are there, and all of a sudden he's okay with it. So that's the problem. That's this sort of square he has to fit in that circle, and I don't know that it fits. So that's his first problem. But to his credit, he did meet with them. And then to be fair, when the interim opposition leader, Candace Bergen, called for the truckers to go home, Mr. Poilievre supported that. She said, look, it's enough, time to go home. You made your point. Now, Charest's point is, Mr. Poilievre, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't make laws and break laws. You need to decide either a legislator and you're conforming and obeying the laws, or you're not. So this got very nasty very quickly. And then in the first debate, Charest was in a room where there seemed to be a lot of Poilievre support, and he was getting some boost, but he just sort of looked them in the eye, and he took the gloves off, and they sort of went at it. And so it was very interesting. Right after that, it appears that he and Patrick Brown don't have a lot of time for each other. I mean, I don't know what happened there, but they were in a caucus together. They don't seem to like each other on a personal level, so I don't know what's going on there. Mr. Brown, I think, has had a good campaign in the sense that, he's sort of, I would say, on most of the issues, and we can go through them, whether it's COVID or gun control or the economy, the budget. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things we cover. He and Charest are pretty well in lockstep. So I would think that they would be natural allies. Then you've got this Roman Baber guy who I would say he's the one.
Wait for a second, if I could. I apologize for interrupting. Let's come back to Patrick Brown. So it would appear to me that he has really staked out a progressive conservative policy position, while Poilievre is a Reform Alliance, a very right wing kind of conservative position, and the feedback I get from people is that Poilievre is attracting a lot of the people that supported the truckers convoy and the protests in Ottawa. A lot of people that are very vocal, anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers, against the Trudeau government, et cetera. And Patrick Brown has done the same thing as he did when he ran for the progressive conservative leadership in Ontario. He's really gone for ethnic votes. He's gone for the suburban votes. It's almost as if it's a progressive conservative suburban campaign against a Western Reform Alliance campaign. What do you think of that?
Well, I know that that's a narrative that is out there, makes sense. I don't know that I'm not sure I bought into that yet, and I'll tell you why. I don't think that Mr. Poilievre is just getting those voters. That I think he's getting, the voters that are more on the sort of conservative right of the party. He's getting. He's definitely getting those people. I think if Poilievre gets it, it's going to be a problem for the People's Party of Canada. I think you're going to see their demise.
Yep.
But I also think there are people in the Conservative Party that are not like sort of on the far right of the Conservative Party that also like Poilievre. And I think they like him because he's a good debater, and he holds government to account, and I think he's very effective, and I think they like him. They like the fact that he can articulate what they think in terms of what they feel wrongs with the Trudeau government. But I also think it's still a problem that he's got such an edge. And I think the bigger problem is this. Jean Charest is, I think, popular with a lot of older conservatives, and I think he's popular with people who have been in the party for many years. But as you know, and this is quite incredible, and this is why I think the Trudeau Liberals are in big trouble. They have signed up 600,000 new members. 600,000. That's incredible. And what it tells me is there is a high degree of voter dissatisfaction with the current Liberal government. And as we know, most times governments aren't voted in, they're voted out. And I think that if, in the last election, two elections, Andrew Scheer in 2019 and Aaron O'Toole in 2021, they pretty well ended this in the same place, within a seat or two. They didn't make an impact. But the Liberals never made an impact as well. And they're only in right now because of this deal with Jagmeet Singh. They're operating like they have a majority government when they have less than 30% of the vote. And they're not popular, and they're operating like a majority government because Jagmeet Singh, it doesn't matter what, it seems to matter what Trudeau does, what corruption, think about it, Brian. The NDP, the great NDP party, the party of in more recent times, Jack Layton and Tom Mulcair, Tommy Douglas, the party of Tommy Douglas, the party that stood up for civil rights for Canadians. I mean, this guy, and I'm talking about Jagmeet Singh, and these, I don't know what you call them, these tools around him. They just, in lockstep, imposed basically martial law and emergencies measures act here without even talking about it. It's one of the worst grievances in this country's history in recent time. And I think they did it, just so they could continue to stay in power. And it's just awful. And now that they've signed this agreement with the Liberals to keep them in power, they're stuck to that. So I think the Liberals and the NDP have sort of become this one big blob of gob. And I don't know that they're going to be able to separate themselves, and people see Trudeau and Singh as the same. In fact, Trudeau's gone even more left than Singh. So that presents opportunities for the Conservatives, but they need to go to the center. That's my
and they're not doing that.
They have to go to the center.
So, I want to take a break for some messages and come back and ask you about some of these policies that Pierre Poilievre is been talking about, firing the governor of the Bank of Canada, invest in cryptocurrencies as a hedge against inflation. It almost, some people have been describing as wacky. Anyway, we're going to take a break and come back more with Dan Donovan, the publisher and editor of Ottawa Life, talking about the Conservative Leadership Campaign in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having a great time listening to Dan Donovan chat about the War Measures Act, martial law, you called it. We're going to have to talk about that in greater detail because that's kind of interesting. And you've obviously been following in detail some of the hearings that are going on right now in Ottawa. But, let's come back to Pierre Poilievre and his positions and where the Conservative Party is and your comment about whether they're going to go right or try to win. It almost seems like it's a mini Trump to me. It is, Trump on the stage during those debates in the Republican Party would call people the most awful nicknames and label them and talk about, your comment about edges and elbows. That's what Trump did, insulting people, and Poilievre seems to have learned that. Populism is what it would appear Poilievre is certainly exploiting. His comments about firing the Bank of Canada, that the World Economic Forum is potentially trying to take us over or influence governance in Canada. His comments about cryptocurrency, where he was smoking hashish, or maybe not a hookah, maybe, and talking about Bitcoin. Some people have described it as almost wacky policies. Certainly, he's been appealing to a fringe right wing. And you talk about these 600,000 people that have joined the party, and it does appear to be a huge number of additional people. But, a lot of people I talk to say that it is the PCP, it is the trucker convoy, it is the people that are anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers that have joined the party en masse, going to his rallies, taking out memberships, and supporting him because he was supportive of the truck convoy. So you don't think it's a wing that is just too right to be successful?
No, and I'll tell you why. And I actually I've heard the Trump comparisons before. I also don't agree with those, and I'll tell you why. First of all, let's deal with the People's Party of Canada. This idea that there's all these people signing up. First of all, the People's Party of Canada got 250,000 votes in the last election. Okay, 250,000 people voted for the PPC. Now, the Conservatives have signed up 600,000 people for their party leadership. So that is not just the People's Party of Canada. That's something else. Now, the Trump thing, I also it's interesting you raise it. I think it's a very cogent point to raise, Brian, because that is out there as well. I've heard that from different people, both in the street, not so much in the street, more actually from other media people. I think the analogy is off, and I'll tell you why. Poilievre has said, like, let's take the Bank of the Governor of Canada. Like, I think he was off when he said that. I think it's wrong. The Bank of the Governor of the Bank of Canada is an independent role, has to be. His claim is that the government was the bank was in lockstep with the government in printing all this money. I mean, we do have $1 trillion debt. That is of concern. I think it's appropriate to raise these issues when we have $1 trillion debt and when we have a Liberal government. The government of Justin Trudeau has spent more money in the last 6 years than all Canadian governments combined since Confederation. That's a fact. We have more debt than we've ever had in our history, and we're closing at $1 trillion debt. And I made up the number wrong. It's around $12,000 per person in this country in debt. So Poilievre was a finance critic. He was a shadow finance critic. Then O'Toole dropped him, but that was not a popular move in the party. It was part of the reason O'Toole got into problems. So the matter of Pierre Poilievre questioning the Bank of Canada, I don't have an issue with that. But again, it goes back to what I said earlier about his edge. He's sort of, it's okay to question this because, geez, look at the money we're printing and the debt. But do you have to punch him in the face? Can't you just be nice? Do you have to go and punch him in the face?
Dan, we did go through 2 years of a pandemic, and governments around the world were printing money and stimulating the economies and sending out checks. And if I don't know the statistic, but if you take a look at what happened in the United States, if you take a look at what happened in Europe, I bet you we have very similar kinds of situations with lots of printing of money and lots of payments to individuals to help us through the pandemic. And frankly, the Progressive Conservative Party in Ontario did the same thing, such that we have incredible debt in Ontario. And the last budget that they presented was a left-wing budget.
Well, I don't think people have a problem with the sort of Keynesian economic theory and that thing they say en français, creusage des trous, digging holes, creating opportunity, creating work during a downturn. The fact is, and I cover this in the article, when Justin Trudeau got elected in 2015, he was elected with the best financial record in the G7. Now, even after COVID, with all the other countries going through the same thing, we have the worst record. Okay, we have the worst debt. And it's very troubling when you look at the debt ratio for our population and the situation we're in. In fact, in this story, I quoted Frank Stronach, Frank from Magna International, one of the great industrialists of Canadian industry in the last half century. And Stronach himself is saying, he's calling for the government to pass a law that they can't be spending more than they're taking in right now because we're at risk of going the way Greece went. This is serious stuff. So, and then there's a concern. They don't seem to have a concern about, and this is what the Conservatives got into in the race, balanced budgets. Are balanced budgets important? Is it important to get back to balance? And we're not, the Liberal government of Justin Trudeau and Christian Freeland have no plans to get back to a balanced budget for decades. And right now we have a real serious problem with, like everywhere, with, inflation. That's not just domestic, that's global. But, we have a government here, and these are things that the Tories are talking about, has shut down our energy sector, has shut down our pipelines. We import oil, 800,000 barrels of oil a day. Why are we importing oil from Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia to fuel Atlantic Canada when we could be self-sufficient here? So there's a whole lot of issues that the Tories are raising.
Isn't it?
Pardon?
It's because Quebec turned down a pipeline, isn't it?
Well, this is the issue. The Conservatives, Jean Charest has come out and said that he's going to build pipelines. But again, the problem is I suppose on the pipeline side, there's no advocate for pipelines for us to get our energy to the markets in the last 6 years. And, we haven't improved at all. We haven't met any of the Paris climate targets. We haven't met any of the climate targets that the Trudeau government has set. The carbon tax that he imposed on Canadians is not going towards climate change. It's going into general revenues, and it's being spent on a whole lot of other things. So these are the things the Tories have been discussing. And so to get back to the point you raised, which I think is a legitimate one about the Poilievre's approach to, there's no issue with someone questioning the Bank of Canada. I think that's fair enough, but it crosses a line when you say you're gonna get in, you're gonna fire the governor of the Bank of Canada. Well, here's the problem with that. On the one hand, you're talking about freedom, and you're talking about democracy, and you're talking about people having the right to free speech and democratic principles. But here's a clue: if you're elected the prime minister, in our democracy, you don't get to fire the governor of the Bank of Canada. It's not a dictatorship. And I think this is what Jean Charest is pointing out to him. You don't get to say that. You don't get to do that. And just saying that affects markets. It affects bank. It affects our confidence in our institutions. So this is where where Pierre Poilievre, he has a tendency to go too far. And I'll say one interesting thing, Brian. My colleague Evan Solomon was doing a show on his weekly political show, and he had David Dodge on, the former governor of the Bank of Canada. And Mr. Dodge, I think, he's got to be in his early 80s. I think he is. Anyways, because I'm going back, like he was the governor of the bank, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago, before Mark Carney, a very respected person, highly respected. He's a person who worked with the Chrétien government to get our debt under control and really created what a powerhouse for Canada in terms of our fiscal framework. Okay. So Mr. Dodge, who I've never, ever, ever heard in all the time I've watched him over the years say even a subtle swear word, never. He's the most distinguished guy I'll ever meet. He's on a national television show with Evan Solomon, and Solomon brings up the point that Pierre Poilievre has been sort of trashing the bank and saying that, the bank doesn't know what they're doing and this and that. And David Dodge looked at him and said, "That's bullshit," on national TV. So that tells you the type of ire that Pierre Poilievre has, and I think it's a problem. Counter that to Jean Charest, who says, "Listen, we have to respect institutions. We have to get along. We have to work together. We have to have balanced budgets. We just, So I think it's not about substance between the two of them. It's more about style.
But I disagree with you. And maybe it comes down to that you think there's a whole bunch of other people that have joined the Conservative Party and are supporting Poilievre. But I think the base that he is attracting are the people that supported the trucker convoy. And, there were, 15%, according to polls, of the Canadian population that supported the convoy. That's 4.5 million people. So that the market that you can access is actually fairly wide and loud. And they disagree with a lot of the institutions that we have in Canada. They frankly wanted to, change the government and take over effectively and have the Governor General and some senators and them run the government. And I think they are people that believe in cryptocurrency, and they are people that don't believe in the World Economic Forum, and they are people that think that the governor of the Bank of Canada should be fired, and so they like that very antagonistic, very edgy kind of approach, that very Trumpianian insult the people in the center and on the left. They like it. That's what they did in February in Ottawa.
Well, and we're going to have to agree to disagree. I actually, your numbers and the way you articulate that make a lot of sense. But what I would say is this: I don't think that's all Mr. Poilievre has in his sort of belt here. I think the comparison to Trump, I think, is off. I think a better comparison for Mr. Poilievre would be Doug Ford. Doug Ford, when he first ran for the leadership. And if you go back to that, a lot of regular folks, everyday people, just were tired of the establishment. We're tired of being told what to do. We're tired of the Kathleen Wynne government being involved in their lives and telling them how they should be acting morally and spiritually and fiscally. And a whole lot of other things. And a lot of people were just very tired. This is the analogy I see. They were just very, very tired of Kathleen Wynne and her brand of liberalism. And Doug Ford came along. And I recall when Doug Ford was running for the leadership, a lot of mainstream media people, including the CBC, were very dismissive of him. Very, very dismissive of him. He's this right-wing Trump guy and this and that. And of course, Doug Ford got in and he wasn't any of those things. And I think that for me, after going through this, I mean, look, Poilievre says some, edgy things that I don't agree with. And the Bank of the Governor of Canada is one of the cryptocurrency thing is a little wacky. I couldn't agree with him more. But that's not, he doesn't say things like Trump that are dismissive of people, that are misogynistic. He's actually on the Indigenous file in this leadership. I've been surprised at how good he's been on that file. That was a surprise to me, just watching some of the things he's done and what he's saying. I'm thinking, okay, well, there's hope there. That's interesting. So I think Poilievre is more like a Ford kind of candidate. I think the Trump thing is a misread. Having said that, Jean Charest is very appealing. And this is where I think the battle lines are going to be drawn, because Conservatives have to make a decision here. I mean, I'm of the view personally that if Jean Charest won the leadership, I think that the Liberals could be wiped out from coast to coast. I think that Mr. Charest would pummel Mr. Trudeau. He would win Quebec. He would take the whole country, and it would just be a wipeout. And that's just based on my looking at elections for the last 3 or 4 decades and seeing what's happened. If he doesn't win it, it's going to be harder for the Conservatives, because then they're going to have to pivot. They are going to have to pivot. And the numbers in the last 2 elections show that you need to pivot to the center. And it's just not happening if you go right. There's not enough votes there.
But that's what they're doing. They're going right now. And they got rid of Aaron O'Toole because he pivoted to the center. And even though he did better than Andrew Scheer, and even though he won the popular vote because he didn't increase the seat count and he didn't win suburban Toronto and suburban Vancouver, they punted him. So, you know, I don't see what's going to happen. Anyway, we're going to take a break for some final messages and come back with some concluding comments from Dan Donovan in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody.
This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. What a fascinating conversation we're having with Dan Donovan, the publisher and editor of Ottawa Life magazine. His cover story this week is on the Conservative leadership campaign. And we've had an interesting discussion of Pierre Poilievre versus Jean Charest and a little bit about Patrick Brown. Maybe we could just talk about sort of the way that these leadership conventions work. And it's not a delegated convention, so you can't control it. But I think that in the last election, it was really Leslie Ann Lewis that put Aaron O'Toole over the top because of her bringing all of her people in that subsequent ballot to Aaron O'Toole. Don't you think it's going to be Leslie Ann Lewis, Roman Baber going to Pierre Poilievre, and Patrick Brown and Scott Aitchison going to Charest? And how does that play out? Because if Leslie Ann Lewis came in third last time, she could easily come in third this time, or fourth if Patrick Brown does well. And you know, most of the people I talk to say that Pierre Poilievre is either going to win on the first ballot, or more than likely is going to be damn close and win it on the second ballot with people coming to him. What do you think?
I think that's very accurate analysis. That's what I'm, just looking at the 600,000 and the numbers. I think Leslie Lewis has not performed well in this leadership compared to the last time. I think she went down the road. She went down the right-wing road, and she went down the one-trick pony road like Roman Baber. Like she's a pro-life candidate, and then she's gone at Poilievre a bit, trying to get her bona fide.
See the truckers often enough or soon enough. You didn't go out with them. I did.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see, she was trying, like the truckers aren't going to be in favor of Leslie Lewis over Poilievre. But I go back to what I said earlier. I think the trucker stuff in this is overstated. I don't think they're as big as, people are calling them the trucker vote and all this. I don't see it that way. I think there's something else going on. I think that's a small part of it. But having said that, I don't think Leslie Lewis is in this race. I think she's been a one-trick pony. I don't think she's done a great job compared to the last time. I think Patrick Brown is going to do better than her, but I think you're very accurate. The Poilievre people, a lot of people are saying that, Poilievre will win it in the first ballot. And that's going to come down to the veracity of these numbers, the 600,000, how many they signed up. So it'll be interesting. If Poilievre doesn't get it on the first ballot, then I think it's in play. And there'll be deals that could be done, but if he doesn't get on the first ballot, we could have a race, and I see that going to Charest. Although, the sort of harbinger here is that Patrick Brown is good at signing up members. He's got a track record of doing that. So what happens if he finishes in second place, and I actually don't think that. I think for me, like he's sort of a beige candidate. I don't see any real presence with him. I don't see any, he's like another Aaron O'Toole to me. Like he's just a guy and he's nothing exciting, and it's sort of like beige, let's paint the dining room beige. It's not, you're not going to get up and get excited about that. You know what I'm saying? So for my mind, I think the Tories need to excite the population. They need to provide a serious alternative. I think that that Charest could win the country. Poilievre can win the party, but can Charest win the party? And that's the issue. And then if Poilievre does win, I think it's a mistake to suggest that he would be a Trump-type candidate. He's going to be more like a Doug Ford candidate if he wins. But if he doesn't lose the edge, I think, one of the things I say in this article, Brian, is I remind Canadians in this and the readers in this article, the thing that destroyed, and this is the irony, the Conservatives love to talk about Canadian history and their history, and there's proud of their country and proud of their history. Well, here's a clue. Take a look in the mirror at your own history in the last 30 years. In 1993, the Conservative Party of Canada under Brian Mulroney transferred the leadership to Kim Campbell. Going into the election, they had 168 seats. They ran ads making fun, nasty ads making fun of Jean Chrétien's facial palsy disability, which to this day, I can't get over that. No one said, hey, don't do that. That's like really stupid. It's not good to make fun of people with a disability. They thought it was funny. They went from 168 seats to 2 seats.
2 seats.
Wipeout, like the Kathleen Wynne wipeout when they went to like a party the size of a van, okay?
Jean Charest, and who was the second one?
Elsie Wayne from New Brunswick. Jean Charest was the only person who survived the Gong Show, and he distanced himself from it, okay? And he would have been the leader had he not been betrayed by a guy out at the convention in Calgary. He would have won that leadership, but that's a whole other story. But the point is this, Elsie Wayne actually got newly elected as a Conservative out in New Brunswick because, I don't know what was going on in the water out there, but she was a great MP anyways. 168 seats to 2 seats. Stephen Harper, Peter MacKay, Stephen Harper, Preston Manning, a bunch of people it took a lot of time, 10 years to rebuild their credibility before they could govern again. But so that was in 2003, 4, 5, 6, right? Harper gets in, he governs for almost a decade. What kills him? What kills him in the last election? You know what killed him? A dead boy on a beach. A dead boy on a beach. A little Syrian boy died on the beach, and the Tories came across like they were a bunch of unsympathetic pricks, at that very moment. And I think that's when Canadians said, yeah, enough of you guys. They need to be nice, and nice will win. Nice and serious. But if you're nice and if you're nasty, it's a problem.
Sunny ways? Is that the way to win?
No, I think people see the hypocrisy. I think Trudeau I think that everything's in place for that guy to get wiped out with the right campaign against him. But it just hasn't, been put together yet.
So I think that.
But I don't think Sunny Ways, I don't think people are in the Sunny Ways mood anymore. That was a big fraud.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I don't think people are in the sunny ways. And I do agree with you that Justin Trudeau and his government have moved to the left, even potentially to the left of the NDP. And I think their budgets lately and policies and pharmacare and things like that potentially take them that way. I had a chief economist with a major think tank in Ottawa come and say, you know what, if they institute pharmacare, we're going to be the peso crisis all over again. It's that unsustainable from a financial standpoint. So, I think that's a big risk. I do think, however, that Pierre Poilievre will increase their vote in the base, but won't attract enough people in suburban Canada to win. So I do think that a Poilievre candidate will potentially win the Conservative leadership, but won't win the country. So we'll be back into a minority government, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. Anyway, fascinating conversation with Dan Donovan, the editor and publisher of Ottawa Life. Got to grab his issue this week that talks in 6,000 words about the Conservative leadership campaign. Dan, we got to have you back and talk about the War Measures Act, and probably have you back and talk about your perception of what's gone wrong with the Liberal Party and the Justin Trudeau branded Liberal Party, the way you describe it of late. Thank you for joining us. That's my show for tonight, everybody. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Ottawa, Dan, at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videocasts are on my website, briancrombie.com. Good night, everybody.